today we're going to do distillation, and we're going to have two setups, one for simple distillation and one for fractional distillation. I'm not going to spend too much time on the theory behind the distillation because I want you to go back to the handout, and but I'm focusing more today on how to set up a simple distillation and a fractional distillation. As you can see, this is the lab where you're going to have the most amount of glassware, so it's very delicate and it's very easy to break these pieces of glassware, and most of them are very expensive, so you have to be very careful and pay attention to every detail. First, let's talk about what you need. First of all, you're going to need a round bottom flask. And here I have a cork ring. And by the way, the cork ring in this room are on that side in one of the cabinet that says cork ring. It even has a picture of the cork ring. So you have to set up your round bottom flask on the cork ring, and later we're going to build up the distillation apparatus. So what goes in the round bottom flask? The procedure says to use about 30 milliliters of each of acetone and 1 propanol. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure 30 milliliters of each, and then we're going to put them in the round bottom flask. Something important to remember is it's best to have a funnel, and then again, how do you measure 30? You have to put yourself at the level of the graduated cylinder. So I'm starting with propanol, measuring 30 milliliters here. And since this experiment is not completely quantitative, it's okay if you don't have exactly 30, but we want you to put about 30 milliliters there. So this is my first ingredient, the propanol, and then we're going to put 30 milliliters of the acetone. Now, acetone has a boiling point that's probably close to 60, 40? There, anyway, one is lower than the other. Acetone is definitely less polar than the alcohol, so it will have a lower boiling point. So it will be the first to distill. Now, once you put your liquids there, a very important part of distillation is to put boiling chips. Boiling chips will have little air trapped inside of them, and that air, as it's heated, will keep that kind of mixing inside your round bottom flask. So all you need is 2 or 3 boiling chips. You don't need much. It's really like a pumice rock here. So all you need is a couple, and you're good to go. So let's repeat. Our first step is to put your liquid in your round bottom flask. Now we're going to start building this setup. We're going to heat it in a heating mantle so it fits right there. The only problem is you want to make sure you raise it a little bit so that when you're ready to cool it, you can lower it down. And we're going to use a jack for that. So there is a jack right here, and you have to put your heating mantle on top. One thing that I see students sometimes have problem with is the connection in the back. Make sure that the cable is connected to the heating mantle. So raise your mantle. And again, this is only to allow you later to lower it down so you can cool your setup quickly. Now, how do we build anything when you use a fume hood like this with a lattice? You always build it from the bottom up, which means like you put the things that go in the bottom of the setup first, and then you add the top what goes on top, not the other way around. So for us, the first thing we need to attach is the round bottom flask to the lattice. So what you need for that is the clamp. And the clamps are in the back of the room over there. So all you have to do is just grab one of these. And first of all, you clamp your round bottom flask. And then you put the clamp on the lattice, not the other way around. I see students doing it the other way around and they struggle putting it together. So here we go. Now I know it's secured. I clamp my round bottom flask. And now I'm ready to attach it to the lattice. So we're done with this. This is perfect. It's sitting well, and it's attached, and it's in the right position. You will see later that the angle is important of how straight that round bottom flask is. The next step, we're going to put this three-way connector. This is a three-way connector. It goes from, it will connect the thermometer on the top and the condenser on the side. But every time you put glass on glass, if we have here, this is a piece of glass and that's a piece of glass, you have to put some grease in between. The grease tubes, we always have like tubes on your tables, so all you need is a tiny bit of grease on your finger, and you touch it on 2 or 3 spots on the side. Don't put too much grease because all you need is just for it to adhere. Once you put it there, you turn it, and as you turn it around like this, it will completely seal the area there, and you won't have any leak later when the liquid start to evaporate. Now what goes on top of this, before we build up, this is pretty secure, but if you want, you can add a keg clamp if it's possible. Sometimes with these clamps you can't, so I think at this point this is pretty good, so it's okay. I don't need to put this because it would be hard to fit it in there. So what goes again on top, we're going to put a thermometer adapter right here, and since it's glass on glass, you always put a little bit of grease, a tiny dab of grease. You put it in 3 or 4 spots on the sides, and then you rotate it to make sure it seals. And then you're going to put your thermometer. We can leave the thermometer last. For now, we don't need to put it right away because it's fragile, so you don't want to break it. But what goes next is the condenser. And here's where it becomes a little tricky, because the condenser needs to have tubing to allow the water to go in. The water must come from the bottom side and come out from the upper side. So make sure you select the right size of tubing that will reach the faucet and the sink. So the out goes to the sink and the in goes to the condenser. This needs to be done before you attach it to your setup. Don't forget, you need to put the tubing first in the condenser, and then you attach the condenser to your setup. So again, we need some grease. There's always a male and a female side of the glass, and you will see it. It's easy to understand which side needs the grease, which one doesn't. So now I know this would be pretty much in the right spot, but I have to attach it to the lattice. And this is where I can't say it enough. You have to be very careful, because if you break this, it's easy to break. You can see that's a little far. So one thing I can do is turn this further to the left there. So you see I'm making it a little closer. I can also lift it up if I can't reach the lattice. But all you need to do is to hold it in place like this. So now I'm going to clamp first the condenser, and then slowly find a way to attach it to the lattice. So as you can see, I attached the condenser to the lattice, but I want you to see that the condenser is loosely held here with the clamp. because all you need to make sure is that it sits there, that's all. Now how do we make sure it doesn't move? That's where you can use the keg clamps. So the keg clamp can come here and attach it to the three-way adapter. And then here we can also, if we want, secure the thermometer. It takes a little pressure to put these keg clamps. So be very gentle when you put them in, because once you put them in, everything is secure in place. Now I'm ready for the thermometer. Now one thing about the thermometer, the bulb here must be exactly where the vapor escapes from these three-way connector. So you have to put it there and push it about this level. The last thing is, before we get started, is the water. So the water must come in from the bottom and out from the top. So you connect the hose, you connect the tubing to the hose. And then you run the water slowly before you start heating anything. You want to make sure your water is running. So we're going to go very slowly. Sometimes if the system wasn't working, there's a little bit of a pressure and it can shake the whole thing. So that's why I say go very slowly, open slowly. And this is pretty good water flow. So once you have the right flow, you leave it inside that sink. And now we're ready to get started heating. The last thing we need to put is the collecting. We're going to collect the liquid after it distills. So we have here a two-way connector. It's called a two-way connector. And again, just make sure you attach it, put some grease, use keg clamp to attach it. And when you apply this pressure, be careful not to break your condenser. And now, the one thing about this two-way connector, it really is very practical when it comes to, when you're ready to collect your liquid. So in the procedure, it says collect the first 2 milliliters in a vial that you call A. So here, every milliliter, by the way, you're going to read the temperature. For every milliliter collected, you read the temperature. So I would read it at the first drop. That would be my volume 0, roughly. And then every milliliter, you read the temperature for every milliliter. The first 2 milliliters, when you collect them there, you want to transfer them into these vials. So what you do is, your first vial, we put markers there, and you can write it. It's right here. So the first vial, you collect sample A. So you're going to put sample A, and after your first 2 milliliters, you have 2 milliliters collected here. What you do is you turn this up, the two-way connector, then you transfer your liquid, put it back, and slowly, as you turn it back, make sure it doesn't spill, and you keep collecting your liquid. And then once you reach, I think, your second sample, you're going to put it in vial B, and then the last few drops, the last 2 milliliters of your distillation will be vial C. So this is a simple distillation. I'm going to start running it. Now, one thing about running a simple distillation is when you start heating, you need to go very, very slowly. I would always go right in the middle and start heating. I never go too high. And if you see that it's distilling too fast, you can lower here the setting. The setting doesn't tell you what temperature, it's just a matter of resistance. So we're like almost halfway when I put it at 5, so I'm halfway. I'm using 50% of the resistance heat. And the higher you go, the more heat you put. So for this experiment, if you put it at 5 at the beginning, it should be pretty easy. And since here the liquid doesn't have to, the vapor don't have to travel that high, the distillation will go pretty fast. You don't need to overheat it. And this was simple distillation. Thank you. So now we're going to do the fractional distillation. Just like we did the simple, the first step is to put your liquid in your flask. So again, flask has to sit, because it's round bottom, you have to put it on a cork ring, and you're going to measure 30 milliliters of both propanol and acetone. So this is 30 milliliters of propanol. And then 30 milliliters of acetone. The next thing are always the boiling chips. A couple of boiling chips inside our flask. One, two. Two is more than enough. And then now we're ready to clamp our round bottom flask onto the lattice. Just like we did earlier, make sure you raise this up a little bit so that you have room for later to cool it off as needed. Now, some of the jacks are not really very easy to work with, but it's okay. A little rusty here. Here we go. So I think I'm good here. I have to first clamp my round bottom flask, attach the round bottom flask to the clamp. Always do this first. And I like to use the flat ones here because they hold them pretty well. So this is the first step, and then we're going to attach it to the lattice. Now my concern is this. Yeah. I think this is a little, I don't want it to be too long, too far out. So that's what I'm trying to do, is to adjust it. So now that we attach our round bottom flask, the next part is the vigro, which is the distillation column. Now this distillation column is long, which means that we're making the path of the vapor a lot longer, so as they move up through that column, they separate better. And they even added more like little rough surface inside to kind of make the vapor kind of go in a much longer path. So the longer the path you have here, the better the separation. These are pretty expensive, so be careful, don't break them. And again, we're going to put glass on glass, so I have to make sure I put grease. You always put grease when you put two pieces of glass together. And of course, don't put too much. It's not the amount as much as it's how you do it. Just do a little bit at a time. Now once I have enough grease there, as usual, you always have to rotate it a little bit, and then I'm going to add the keg clamp if it fits. It looks like it's not going to fit here, so it's fine. The next step is to attach my column to the, and here I'm attaching it really loosely. All I need to do is make sure it's just sitting there, doesn't tilt, it doesn't fall. So this is good enough. I mean, it's set in the right spot. The next thing is the three-way adapter. So one will go to the column, one will go to the condenser, and one will go to the thermometer. That's why we call it three-way. We have three things to attach to it. So three-way adapter, easy to remember. And I'm going to grease two of the sides there. Now my three-way adapter is greased and attached. I just need to put keg clamp to secure it here. Then I'm ready to put my condenser. Remember the condenser, you can't put it until you're done putting the tubing. So you have to put your tubing first, and one goes to the in and one goes to the out, and make sure that the length works with your sink. And now this is ready to go, but all I need to do is make sure that it's attached to the lattice without really forcing it into the lattice. So it has to be loosely held right there. You can do it this way, so it's kind of almost just like holding it. And I guess I used the wrong clamp. It's not working. Let's try this one. And so you notice I'm attaching to the lattice, and I'm just making it kind of loose just to make sure it just sits there. What will really secure the condenser is the keg clamp. So my condenser here, just make sure it's completely attached and sealed. So what goes next is the thermometer adapter. And a little bit of grease there. You can add, if you want, a keg clamp there. It's not necessary, but you can do it if you want, just to make sure they're sealed together. And then the last piece is the two-way connector. So a little bit of grease here, and then I'm going to put the two-way connector, and then the keg clamp. And then finally, the thermometer. So this is your setup for fractional distillation. So before we get started heating, we want to make sure the water is flowing in our condenser. The in is always the bottom. So you connect it to the faucet, and then this is the out, and start slowly, run the water very slowly. And you can see that it's filling the condenser. Now sometimes students tell me, but wait a minute, it's not filling completely the condenser. And it's okay if you have a little portion of the condenser that doesn't have water. As long as you have water here, by the time the vapor gets there, it will condense and it will be collected. So now what's the last part is really to put a graduated cylinder to collect your sample. And just like I showed it earlier there, you have to have, so we're going to raise the jack as high as you can to get the graduated cylinder close to the two-way adapter. It's a little rusty here, but eventually it will work. So just like we did earlier, you're going to collect the first 2 milliliters, and then every milliliter you measure the temperature. So this is your setup. So here's my first sample A, and I want you to see the flow of the liquid here. You see this setting at 5 is pretty good because it's really allowing a steady flow without going too fast. So this is what we're looking for. And again, you have to keep measuring for every milliliter the temperature. And when your little graduated cylinder fill up, you can pour it into the big one. And just follow the procedure. Make sure the first 2 milliliters are in vial A, and then you're going to have 2 milliliters of the middle portion of your distillation, and the last 2 milliliters in vial C. So this is what we're looking for, that little steady flow of distillation. And again, if I'm ready, let's say, to stop right here, I'm almost at 8 milliliters plus whatever I have here. Quickly, before it fills up, I'll put it upside down like this, empty your graduated cylinder into the big one, and then put it back in. So that's how you work with this. One last important thing about distillation is never distill to dryness, meaning make sure you have a few milliliters left in your round bottom flask. And since we measured 60 milliliters, we don't need, and here we have a graduated cylinder that's about 50 milliliters. So once you fill this up with the first 2 milliliters and this big graduated cylinder, and then another 2 milliliters, you're good to go. You don't have to go any further than that. So 2 milliliters in your first vial A, and then 50 milliliters in the 50 milliliter graduated cylinder, and then you collect the last 2 milliliters, put them in vial C, and then you stop your distillation. So here we have our fractional distillation, and you start to see the vapor condensing here. You see that in this setup, the vapor has to do much more work to go up there, and it might take much longer. And even if you heat it enough, first of all, you don't want to overheat here, because if you overheat here, it will overshoot and comes out before it distills. So on one hand, we don't want to overheat it, and on the other hand, we don't want it to cool off very quickly, because if it cools off in here, it keeps on going back to the round bottom flask. So what's ideal, compared to the simple distillation, since the path was pretty short there, we're going to go a little bit more, maybe put it at 6, and keep it at 6. I wouldn't go more than 6 at the beginning. And then when you start seeing your first few drops coming out of your condenser, then what you should do is you wrap your fractional column with aluminum foil. Now the aluminum foil is good because it kind of keeps the heat in, so you kind of like just go like this and make sure you cover it. You can go all the way up to this level, so we can add a little bit more. See, I covered the top. You can cover the whole thing, a little bit here, and then it would also help if you cover it up to this level so that the vapor can keep on going. And this is the only difference with the simple distillation, is it needs a little bit boost to make it go up. But of course, we want to see later, when we analyze the samples collected with GC, which one is more effective. And that's it. Thank you. So it's been roughly 30 minutes since we started. It went pretty fast. And we already collected our 50 milliliter mixture here, plus the first vial. And now I have the last sample here, the last 2 milliliters for my last vial. So now I'm done with the distillation. So make sure you mark, by the way, these vials. Now when you're done, first step is turn it off. The first step, you turn off your heating mantle. And you want to lower it to cool off your round bottom flask. So make sure it's secure, doesn't move. So you're going to lower, and by the way, be careful, you have to put away all the chemicals before you move to the next step. So this is cooling off. You lower your heating mantle and you allow it to cool off. Once it cools off, maybe like a few minutes, I would disconnect the heating mantle from the outlet to make sure it doesn't overheat, and you never know, you don't want to burn yourself here. You see everything kind of stopped. So what we'll do is at this point you can move it away to the bag as far as possible from you. So first move away the source of heat from you so you can see, make sure this is secured. You lower the jack and then you push away your heating mantle. Now, how do we dismantle all of this? It's the other way around. When we built it, we started from the round bottom flask, then the three-way connector, then the condenser, then the two-way connector, then the graduated cylinder. Doing it the other way around, I'm going to first close the water. Okay? What you do is remove the water from the hose and allow the water to empty from your tubing right here. It has to empty slowly, and if it doesn't, eventually it will do. You see how it will slowly empty up. Then you remove your two-way connector. That's the first piece. And you see, first remove the clamp, then the two-way connector. Now here we can slowly open this, remove it from the lattice, remove the keg clamp, and then our condenser is removed. Now how does it empty? You have to create some air going in here. So slowly remove the top tubing, and then you see it will empty out. Now we're done with the condenser. Then the third piece would be the thermometer. Then the thermometer adapter. And you see here, the thermometer adapter kind of stuck. So at this point, I can take this whole thing, put it on a ring cork, remove the clamp, and slowly dismantle this. It looks like I didn't put enough grease, even though I thought I did. So slowly, when it cools off, you can remove the pieces from each other. Now what do you do with the leftover chemicals? Of course, you put them all together in the same container and you dispose of them in the waste container in the fume hood. Thank you. So it's been a while now. I already collected my sample A, which are the first 2 milliliters of the fractional distillation, and then we let it keep on going, and you see it's a pretty steady flow. So you have to keep an eye on it. If it has a steady flow, it means you are working at the right temperature. If the flow slows down, if it stops, you increase slightly the heat. So I'm on 6, so let's say it starts to slow down, don't go more than 7. Don't go to 10 all the way. You know, keep adding a little bit heat at a time. And if you want, you can kind of time your rate after every second. Let's say I have a drop, so that's pretty good. And it will work pretty well. As you can see, as long as you have a steady flow, it means your vapor is moving up and everything is good to go. So here we are done. We have about 2 milliliters for the last sample. So what do we do again? First step, you turn off the heat. Second step, you can also disconnect the cable so that you know it's completely not heating. And then you're going to lower the jack to make sure you're not heating your round bottom flask. And here, be very, very careful as you lower it. And then the next step would be to, we start from here, and then all the way down. So it's always the opposite of what you did at the beginning. Now, just like I did earlier, I'm going to move away the jack, move away the heating mantle, put them out of the way, and then I'm going to start removing the two-way connector very slowly. Then slowly remove the condenser. Once we remove the condenser, we already turned off the water. We remove the hose from the faucet first. Always work from the faucet. Make sure everything is in the sink so you don't have water flowing all over the places. Then you start removing the top tubing. And then once your condenser is empty, then you remove the second tubing. So now I already have 2 pieces got, two-way connector, condenser. Then can go here, remove thermometer, then slowly remove the thermometer adapter and the 3-way connector. And then the last piece would be, the last 2 pieces would be first your column, and then finally your round bottom flask. So I hope you understand, to build up, you always start glassware first, clamp the glassware, then attach it to the lattice, and then build on top of it. And when you take it off, it's the other way around. What you put last is what you remove first. So everything you did in order, building it from the bottom up, is exactly the opposite when you undo it, is from the end to the round bottom flask. And thank you.